Hello everyone, I'm Pete Leyden and I'm the founder of Next Agenda and the company putting this on. This is the Clean Energy Challenge, and what we're doing with the Clean Energy Challenge is we're really bringing people together to start figuring out or to start putting a lot of interesting creative work into how America could get all its electricity onto clean energy as fast as possible, and as fast as possible being reasonably possible, but you know, we're talking 10 to 15 years, not the kind of incremental way that we're on now. Now, today is not a normal conference. It's a very innovative day. We're trying a lot of new things. And I'm going to tell you one thing we're doing is we basically have invited you all, not as audience. Everyone here is a participant. We specifically invited you because we know you have some talent, some skills, some knowledge, some background that would be actually valuable in this context. A lot of you are from the technology and energy space, but a lot of you also have more you could say social science backgrounds, finance, politics, media, all the other pieces that would have to go to solve this. And so really you are the program today as much as anybody. But I want to basically kick off this. You're not just professionals, you're not just coming from your basic companies or your basic fields. A lot of you have children, you got neighbors, you've got communities, you're citizens, most of you are Americans. And we're also coming here today for that. And I really want to basically connect with everybody here that, you know, let's think both of professionally where we're coming from, but also that we are citizens of the country, and we are in a really critical moment in the life of our country, in the history of our country. And we don't want to be sappy about it, but we also do not want to lose the perspective that this is a very, very, very important time for the country right now. And people like yourselves have a lot to offer, and we all have to start to pay attention on this. Now, America's actually hit about a handful of times in its history where we have basically come up against, some people think of it as crisis, but we come up against two key things. We basically come up against an unprecedented set of challenges that we previously did not know how to wrap our hands around. And that the past ways of doing things, of politics, of organizing, of all the way the economy worked, everything else, just didn't work. And the second thing that happened is there's been an evolution of the deep fundamentals of the economy or the society, the agrarian economy going to industrial, rural living going to urban, that just makes such fundamental changes that we have to basically reinvent America in a pretty fundamental way. The reinvention of America basically also takes three basic pieces. We have to completely mobilize people and reorganize society in a very different way. And that starts with the most high-capacity people, leadership people, people that really are kind of without being too elitist about it, the people that can really provide leadership. Starts with them, but ultimately we have to reorganize society in a pretty fundamental way. The second thing we have to do is we end up leveraging new tools in new ways, because that's the only way to solve the next problem, is to kind of bring new things to the table that haven't been utilized in the past eras there. And the third thing is we have to have an explosion of new ideas, and we have to break out of the constraints of the old ideas. Now, we've seen this without getting into too much of a history lesson. I think there's been basically four fundamental times in American history. There was one right in the early part of the 19th century with Thomas Jefferson, and they called it the Revolution of 1800, which we essentially democratized the economy and society out of the more aristocratic 18th century. There was also the Civil War period, which people forget was not just about slavery, but it was about democratizing education, the Homestead Act, democratizing the land of the West. There was an explosion of innovation that reshaped building the railroads, that basically built a whole different way that America operated for the next 50 years. There's another one around the turn of the 20th century, which we called the Progressive Era, which kind of reworked that raw capitalism into a much more saner kind of 20th century capitalism that we got used to. We had all kinds of progressive income tax to the kind of Food and Drug Administration, women's rights, all kinds of things. And the one that people have been making a lot of mention to is this one with FDR, with the collapse of the economy in the last year. We've been talking a lot about what was going on there. But there was actually a period of about 15 years through the World War II that essentially reinvented America for the next 50 years. The question is, are we in one of those beginnings now? It's not about one person, it's not about Obama, it's not about any of those people. They're just kind of symbols of essentially the mobilization of America in a different way, and a real kind of fundamental shift in how we do things. So the question is, and I would put to you that we're in one of those moments now. So if you take that perspective and you just start thinking back, you know, look at what's going on with us. Now, everyone here is aware of the climate change, and we're going to have Saul come up here in a minute and really drive it down our heads. This is going to define our lives. This is the next 50 years of what the main problem that's going to happen on the planet on any kind of meta level. And it's something so beyond 20th century politics and solutions that we really, really have to think this a very new way. The other thing is we are globalizing into one integrated whole. That is the fundamental restructuring, as fundamental as any other previous era of America here. Those two meta changes are essentially creating a series of, you could say, 21st century challenges, all of which are massive shifts we got to deal with here. We go around the list. Now, in that context, you basically think what we would have to do to seriously take this on, not just elect a new president, not just kind of incrementally put things through, is we essentially have to assemble, draw off the people of our era's talent and knowledge, I mean, in an unsurpassed way. We have so much education, endowment, capital, all kinds of things ready, but we have to basically find a way to tap into that. We have to essentially start leveraging the tools that we all know are the powerful tools of our era that are totally underutilized in the 20th century. We're just being discovered. And we have to figure out, starting now, a serious level of innovation to take on those 21st century problems. Next agenda, just to put this in context, what we're trying to do is take those three things, and in our modest way, we're trying to figure out a way that we can start to tap into the kind of expertise that you folks have that is currently not in a national conversation, that's not being leveraged in any kind of consistent way, that's kind of not in this kind of solving behind closed doors in DC kind of thing. We're also trying to figure out how do you actually take the best of kind of offline tools, face-to-face facilitation, things that private sector uses all the time now, that isn't being used in public policy ways, but also the collaborative tools online, which is, again, we're just starting to see the power of wikis, the power of kind of tools that we can start to really scale up. And how do you link offline collaboration and online collaboration? Get those two in sync to really start working on a much more scalable way. And the third thing is we've got to start challenging another generation, coming up with much bigger, much more transformative solutions that are way much more up to the scale of the problem. The scale of the climate change timetable that we all are seeing on a timetable, we have to start thinking much bigger than what we're doing now. Now, next agenda, I would say on just three levels, because people are going, what's this next agenda? And this isn't a big pitch for next agenda, but I do want to put in context two things that's going on here. We're taking a bite at this. We're trying to say, okay, you know what? We got to start trying stuff. We can take a 6-month discrete time period. It's not too long that it's a big academic exercise. It goes on for years. It's not too short that it's trivial. We take 6 months. We take a big challenge, a fundamental thing to the country that we don't really know how to solve, but really have to when you really think through. We have to figure this out. And we start to put it together in this new way. So there's a way that we get smart, innovative, knowledgeable people like yourself working in a new way physically and online together. That's one piece of it. The second piece of it, though, is you have to basically expose this to much wider audiences. One, in order to link up more people like yourself outside of San Francisco and the rest of the country and also all over the world, we have to get moving this online. Video is the linchpin on that. The second thing is we have to start building much greater exposure to these kind of more transformative ideas to other people in this country, to build the constituencies, get the education going much, much broader all around the world. It's the critical piece. We can come up with the greatest plan. We can come up with the greatest network of folks to figure this out. We've got to move the needle across basically this country and the planet. That's going to take a different kind of media. And the third way is we're doing it out of the way. We need to scale these efforts up in a way that traditional kind of nonprofit ways and other ways have not done. We've got to do this all across a bunch of issues, and we've got to do it across not just this country, all across the world. So for you guys to understand what we're doing today, the 6 months would start, first of all, we're framing a problem. We're trying to get people to think, how would America get all its electricity onto clean energy as fast as possible? 2, we're getting you folks together in a physical room where people can really collaborate and really connect in a different way to basically brainstorm. Think of it as a fundamental way to start to rough out the terrain of what it would take to do that. 3, we're basically got to have other kinds of meetings that are going to integrate these things and start to see how they interconnect with each other. We're not worrying about interconnecting. We're not worrying about that now. Now it's just get out the rough ideas of what we would have to do to solve this. Then we're going to move it more into the web where we got to evolve, refine, and get this much broader audience working on this thing, which we're going to do. The next one is we've got to find ways to kind of hone this down, choosing through voting and so some kind of like decision-making process. And ultimately, at the end, we come up with a kind of presentation, both in DC, but also to other parts. It's not just a DC-centric, here's some policies, but a set of solutions that people can now look at that are up to the scale of the problem and are actually can be adopted not just by government, but business in all kinds of different ways. So that gets us to today's topic, climate change. Saul Griffith's going to tell us in a minute, kind of really frame it in the global context of climate change. What we're doing is one notch under that, is we're trying to figure out how would we get from the carbon energies to clean energies in just the electrical kind of grid as fast as possible, let's say 10 to 15 years. That is one subset of solving climate change, and it's only one piece of our energy grid here in the United States, but it is a big and essential problem. If America could crack that in 10 years and model that to other parts of the world, get the kind of technologies that could do it, the manufacturing capacity that could shift that quickly, that would have a big, very significant effect on the rest of what's going on. The reason this is huge, and I want to put it in context, this is a doable thing. Our technology people are going to lay this out. It's a doable thing technically, but look at what we'd have to do, and this kind of chart shows you. Right now, currently, about 67% of our electrical grid is on carbon fuels. The little pink one is the one that's renewables, you could say. We would have to shift that whole thing in a course of 10 to 15 years. It's a monumental shift. It's a blow. The other way to look at this is Gore put a challenge out a year ago to say this is our current breakdown of what essentially our electrical grid is made up of today. Coal, natural gas, all that. All the grays are essentially carbon-based. In 10 years, we would have to shift it to that. And this is just their idea. This is the Climate Alliance's concept. But it's just giving you a sense of the shift we would have to do. The technical people and engineering people say, there's not waiting for a tech breakthrough. There's no thing that's really standing in the way of this. We can solve this. But we have to basically hit two sides of this equation. The tech people are figuring out the best way to do this. And we have a lot of them in the room today. And part of the morning of today is going to be figured out what would that have to look like. But the other side is the social innovators in the broadest sense. Politics, finance, media, education, all the people, half the people in the room here, they have to understand the technical way and what we've got to do. And the technical people have to also understand the difficulties in getting this through politics, in actually getting consumer behavior to change, into really getting businesses to adapt this kind of efficiencies. There is a huge amount of things that also they have to understand. So we're hooking these two groups together. The afternoon will be more social, morning technical. You're all part of the equation. We all need you. Because if we're ever going to come close to this thing, it's basically going to need both sides of it. So I want to keep everybody, if you can, thinking on that higher plane. Thinking on that plane as an American or a citizen of the world, however you want to frame yourself, in a very critical time. Now, the last time they did this, they didn't know what the hell they were doing when they first came in. I mean, you know, there's been a lot of talk about the analogies to the New Deal and FDR coming in and the crisis of the collapse of the banking system. They treaded water for about 4 years. I mean, they tried deficit spending, and there was Social Security. I mean, they were trying all these New Deal things. But in effect, what really basically built the next system was essentially the transformation of the country through World War II. Now, three things that basically really drove the economy and restructured the economy was essentially one, they had a global challenge and a threat that everyone took seriously. That was really what really started to get everyone to pay attention. Secondly, they mobilized the entire country. All people like you in the 1940s were drafted. You were reoriented. You dropped what you're doing in the private sector. You all just did. Solving this problem was what you did. And we essentially completely retooled the economy and society in the war pace of the 4 years, not 10 years, 4 years war pace. But ultimately, the post-war society that came out of that, the great boom in the 50s and 60s, always retooling the economy and the society in a way that essentially led to the post-war boom. That is the system, UN, all the kind of Bretton Woods Accord, IMF, all these things that we now take for granted, World Bank, they all were invented in the span of 15 years, actually literally 3 years, those things. And we are living with that system for the last 50, 60 years. That's innovation at a global scale. That's world historical innovation. That's totally doable. They did it then. We need to do it now. We were having fun with this, you know, around the time of the inauguration. And people have been talking about, you know, oh my gosh, the analogies to, you know, the deficit spending and whether we need to, how do we use government to kind of get us out of this funk. That's not the right analogy. The right analogy is essentially the real beginning of our era, the next 10 or 20 years of what we really got to do. We have to basically, I would say, reorient around the true global threat and challenge. And it doesn't have to be a world war. Luckily it doesn't. But it is truly the next really big challenge that everyone has to wrap their heads on. Two, we've got to essentially start mobilizing society differently. Now, right now, it's going to take the best and the brightest, people like yourselves, to really start wrapping their heads around this thing. But ultimately, it's going to take a remobilization of the entire country because we're going to have to reorganize literally how people live and work. And finally, we've got to come up to solutions that are up to the nature of the challenge. I know there's a current energy bill going in through the fall here. There's all kinds of great and good efforts going on in terms of reorienting our incentives and things on the general economy. But what really everyone will agree on is that is not nearly up to the pace we have to do to shift this into the kind of fundamental shift we have to do on our energy systems and our electrical systems to ultimately solve this very, very pressing problem of climate change. If we walk back from we have to solve climate change, which means to solve climate change, we really have to shift off carbon. To get off carbon, we really have to get to some kind of clean energy system. To do that, we have to reorganize so much of our business life. We have to get efficiencies much larger down. We've got to basically bring in the kind of energy use we do. We've got to get people to understand and wrap their heads around that. We've got to train the workforce to do that. We've got to educate kids from the beginning. To do all that is really got to happen. We're going to start with you. It's going to start with all of us. And for this day, hopefully we're going to at least just start a little baby step in starting people to think about how we might go about one big piece of it, which is getting the grid onto clean energy.